Welcome to the Filmlinks Podcast,
a bi-weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is episode 78, Serious Series 3, Gargantuan Godzilla Generations.
Yeah, talk about a lot of movies, Jonathan. This is technically speaking the longest running movie series constantly in production of all time.
Yeah, that is an official Guinness World Record that this film series actually holds. So we were like, how can we pass up this series out of all the series that there are? We got to get the longest one, and it's Godzilla. Everybody knows Godzilla. Although after watching through a lot of these movies, like, I don't understand how it stayed around for so long. But it's a lot of fun.
We'll talk about that. I think Godzilla is bigger than his movies in a lot of ways, and he kind of becomes bigger than his movies.
He's like Batman. He's an idea.
Yeah, he like both embodies like all of the fear of Japan and all of the hope of Japan at the same time. At least in his presentation in these movies, is really interesting. Anyway, talking about...
I kind of like the fact that we've already talked about King Kong, and we'll probably talk about King Kong a little bit more in this episode. But King Kong and Godzilla are two characters, two creatures that exist solely because of film. These did not come from books or comics or anything beforehand. These are embedded into the public's imagination worldwide because of the medium of filmmaking. And I think that makes these two characters, and Godzilla in particular, because it's such a long-running thing, really special, especially to talk about on a podcast about filmmaking. Yeah.
It's pretty unique. In a way, it's almost like the pinnacle of the super series. Yeah, let's add more S's in there, Jonathan, next time. We don't have enough. Because it's been running for so long, and as we kind of noticed in the past too, like, these ideas and concepts tend to grow outside of like their beginning containers to the point where they become so big, especially when they're not tied down by like a book or like different ways to interpret the book. Like when you're running adaptations, you're constantly going back to the beginning and reinterpreting, whereas this guy just grows and grows and grows. Actually, literally, he does grow. Like, he actually becomes bigger until all the way up until the 2014 Godzilla, where he is at his largest.
I think, was he bigger in Shin Godzilla?
I don't know.
I think he might have been.
His tail was definitely longer.
Yes. His, oh man, Shin Godzilla was great. We'll have to talk about that.
Anyway, I watched every Godzilla movie for this week, Jonathan. I watched literally all of them.
I watched 8, which to a normal person should sound like a lot. And I was getting fed up with them, to be completely honest. So I don't know how you did it, Alex, or what kind of coffee you were drinking. But tell us how many movies that you watched to get ready for this.
Well, I added them all up, and just Godzilla movies, 37. If you include the 2 Pacific Rim movies, which I watched for kind of like a future influence take on this week's episode, 39. So nearly 40 movies were watched in the making of this podcast. And oh man, that's a lot of Godzilla. And I'll tell you this right now, most of them are not good.
I figured that from the ratio of the 8 films that I watched and the ones that there was a range of like enjoyment in these films. I think it goes from the first couple, which are like, okay, yeah, I can see like some thematic stuff going on there, some national themes that are inducing these films, to I'm laughing at them because of how campy they are, and so I'm enjoying them in that sense, to just rolling my eyes because can't we come up with something different? To like, okay, they went even further off the rails, so I'm laughing again, and like everything in between. It was crazy.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's definitely like periods where it's more child friendly. There's periods where it's more serious. The Millennium period, I think, is especially ridiculous. But before
I think I didn't watch any of the Millennium Period.
That's probably a good idea. Before we get into the Godzilla films proper for today, let's take a quick run through the periods of Godzilla and kind of his origins too. So the word Godzilla is a romanticization, which just means put into Roman letters, of the Japanese word Gojira, which is a combination of two other Japanese words, which mean not Godzilla. Sorry, that would have been stupid. Which mean gorilla and whale. So he's super big and strong, and he's kind of aquatic in nature. I'm a little shocked they didn't work lizard in there or dragon or something.
Yeah, at all.
That would have made much more sense to me. Gorilla's always kind of thrown me, but hey, this was also something that happened during the early stages of production design and creature design when they weren't really sure how Godzilla was going to look. So I could see maybe in the past he was a little hairier before they decided, oh, we're going to go with a lizard.
Yeah, and also in the first two films, which I feel like deserve their own kind of like discussion, like they could be talked about in separate, because once you hit the third film, King Kong versus Godzilla, it like changes a lot.
It changes
but
a whole lot. The first two are films, really serious Ishiro Honda think pieces.
Yeah.
And then it kind of turns into a child-friendly thing. Although I really like King Kong versus Godzilla. I personally really enjoyed that one.
I did too, but the tone shift from Godzilla Raids Again to King Kong versus Godzilla
it's rather dramatic.
It was whiplash inducing.
And that's also the shift in the series from black and white to color. Which I find is pretty appropriate. Anyway, so we have these periods, like official periods of Godzilla production, and sometimes it's associated, and they're kind of associated with multiple things. Like, for instance, the first one is called the Showa Period, and Showa is the name of the ceremonial name, that might be slightly off, I'm sorry, of the emperor at the time. But also, it was a period when it was headed by one certain production team, the production team that headed the production of Ishiro Honda. And he wasn't always the guy in charge of making the movie, but it was kind of the same crew, and they kept making movies. And then it shifts on to another production crew and another emperor. And we'll go through all of them really quickly here. But the first one is the Showa Period. These are films made during the reign of the Showa Emperor, which, if you didn't know, is Emperor Hirohito, the emperor during World War II. Most of them were directed by Ishiro Honda, one of the best directors of Japanese cinema, in my opinion. The special effects were supervised by I'm going to kill myself today with these names. Eiji Tsuburaya. That sounds right. Eiji Tsuburaya, who is the special effects guru behind Godzilla. He also went on to do a lot of very large creature battles. So he also did Ultraman later on. Who appears in Ready Player One, if you've seen that movie or read that book. And of course, Haru Nakajima, the man behind Godzilla himself, which was originally just a guy who got hired to be in a suit and then kind of became like an icon as Godzilla, even though most people didn't know his name until much later in his life, when people became like this generational fandom of Godzilla came about, and people were like, hey, who's the guy who was in the suit? Oh, this guy. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And he's
like the Andy Serkis of Suitmation.
Yeah. And, sometimes we talk about these creative people, and they kind of struggle to get away from one part of their career. Not the case with Nakajima. He loved Godzilla. He loved his time in the Godzilla suit. He only stopped because he had to, for medical reasons, or just like age. And he still loved it up until the day he died. He had Godzilla paraphernalia all over his house, which is just like really nice to see. Like, yeah, somebody actually enjoyed their career and didn't spend their life running away from it. With the few notable exceptions of the first couple movies, and then Godzilla vs. Hedorah, which is just freaking dark. It's the most slaughterfest Godzilla movie out there, I think. Most of these films are fairly light and kind of aimed towards children. including the terrible Son of Godzilla, which we actually posted something from earlier this week. Part of it got recut
check out
into
our Twitter.
a parenting ad. But anyway, that's the Showa period. So next up is the Heisei period. These were films produced during the early reign of the Heisei Emperor. A lot of reboot. They rebooted the series essentially right after the first film, and they ignored all the others from the Showa period, which kind of becomes a running theme. A lot of people do that. Everybody tends to enshrine that first movie as this is the origin story, and then everything that we're doing comes right after that. Ignore all the other crap. The Heisei period is unique because it actually is all one running story with one or two characters who are actually present in the film, each film, besides Godzilla himself. And Godzilla in this one is kind of towards the end of the Showa period. He becomes like an anti-hero where he's saving humanity. In the Heisei period, he's not really evil, but he's not good either. He's more of like just a super destructive natural force who's just doing whatever he's doing. And the humans just kind of have to try to survive around him. Then you have the Millennium period. And these are films made around the turn of the millennium. So, like, I think the first one's in 1999, the last one's in 2003. These ones are all anthological, so none of them connect to each other, but all of them are technically a reboot following directly after the original Godzilla film in 1954. And these ones get really crazy and really stylized. The only two that are actually connected are Tokyo SOS and Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla 2, which are both ridiculous movies. And they're, of course, they're all direct follow-up to 1954. And now we have the current period, which doesn't really have a defined production team, but we'll see what happens going forward. In Tokyo, at Toho, they are currently working on a follow-up to Shin Godzilla, from what I understand.
Oh, good.
Which is going to be great because I love Shin Godzilla. And then there, of course, is the Godzilla anime series on Netflix, which, in my opinion, isn't so great, but it's interesting if you want to see Godzilla in anime form. And then, of course, there is a history of American productions, co-productions, and remakes. So a lot of them get recut, like the original Godzilla, King Kong versus Godzilla, 1985, which is the first Heisei Godzilla film. They all get recut into American versions. And those ones are actually ones that get chopped up. Not just dubbed, but like chopped up. Like the first one had this white actor cut into the film, and suddenly he becomes the main character of the film, kind of like spliced into this Godzilla film. Which is pretty interesting. There is the one instance of the TriStar American production of Godzilla starring Matthew Broderick, which I think might have been the first one I saw when I was really little, because as I watched it, I started remembering bits and pieces of it.
I think a lot of people will be familiar with that one because that's been around for a while now, and it's kind of one of the biggest American productions of Godzilla.
Yeah, it's something, all right. It's interesting.
I haven't seen it in a long time since I saw it when I was younger.
I don't think if it was ever good, it didn't hold up. So, and then of course there's the new Warner Brothers series, which I believe is kicked off by Godzilla 2014, and then we're looking forward to Godzilla King of the Monsters to come out here in either this year or next year. Jonathan, do you know?
I don't remember.
Okay.
And then this year is King of Monsters, and then
2020 or 2021 is Godzilla versus Kong.
With the King Kong from Kong Skull Island, which came out a year or two ago.
Okay, right on. Okay, yeah, right. They're putting together their own cinematic universe because that's what we do nowadays.
Basically.
All right.
Because that's kind of the whole reason that they made another King Kong, because that King Kong was obviously very different from the King Kongs that we covered in our King Kong episode, but it was basically just a direct setup for Godzilla versus King Kong.
All right, so out of those crazy, all these movies, all these 37 movies, Which ones are we covering today, Jonathan?
All right, so we're starting with the original Godzilla from 1954, of course, directed by Ishiro Honda. It is the original. It is great. It has lots of themes and depth behind it, which you start to yearn for as you watch through more. It is from the Showa period. Godzilla versus King Ghidorah from 1991. The second time that Godzilla is dedicated a film with King Ghidorah. There's one from the Showa period. I feel like there are a lot of these films, specifically from the Heisei and Millennium period, where they take villain, or I guess other monsters that Godzilla fights in the Showa period and kind of updates them. Because I don't think they don't acknowledge the actual films from the Showa period, do they? They just kind of like take that monster and redo it.
Yeah, pretty much. They redo it. And typically they redo the origin story too. The most consistent thing outside of Godzilla himself having nuclear powers is Mothra being from Child Island or Infant Island, whichever one it's called in the particular incarnation, and the fairy twins associated with him or her. Yeah, depends on the Mothra. Mothra dies a lot, and there's a lot of new Mothras. I don't think there's a Mothra movie where Mothra doesn't die and then like leave an egg behind that becomes the new Mothra. That's just how it goes.
And then finally, we'll be talking about the American production Godzilla 2014, Godzilla from 2014, directed by Gareth Edwards.
Godzilla,
and
2014.
That'll be kind of. I would not put it past them to name a film like that. Like Godzilla 2000.
I mean, that's what the American recut of Godzilla Returns, which is the kickoff of the Heisei period, is called. It's called Godzilla 1985.
But that's not what we're talking about today. Let's get into Godzilla from 1954. Jason, give us a plot rundown.
Godzilla from 1954. Shipping freighters and fishing vessels around Odo Island start to vanish, presumably destroyed not by storms, but by something much more mysterious. Reporters flock to the island only to be told by the locals that they believe it is an ancient sea monster known as Godzilla that the villagers used to sacrifice young girls to. Soon the island itself is attacked, and the government sends a paleontologist, Yamane, to investigate. He finds the monster itself and concludes that Godzilla had been awoken from a long sleep by underwater hydrogen bomb testing. Yamane wants the creature to be studied, and the government wants Godzilla destroyed, launching an attack with depth charges that fails. Meanwhile, Yamane's daughter, Emiko, breaks off her arranged engagement to her father's colleague, Serizawa, in favor of a salvage boat captain named Ogata. Serizawa is developing an extremely effective underwater weapon that can vaporize all life within range. Godzilla emerges from Tokyo Bay and attacks the city, causing massive damage and loss of life before disappearing back into the ocean. The Japanese self-defense force starts to work on their defenses for the monster's return. Emiko and Ogata attempt to get permission to wed from Yamane, but a despondent Yamane clashes with Ogata over whether Godzilla should be studied or destroyed. Godzilla attacks again, and none of the jets or tanks or electric fences can stop him as he burns more and more of Tokyo to the ground. Emiko and Ogata remember Serizawa's research, the oxygen destroyer. Could another super destructive weapon be the way to stop the monster awoken by the use of an H-bomb? Or will Japan be doomed to burn in the flames of Godzilla's wrath?
All right, so this one is super dark and really depressing. And before we talk about some of the themes, let's talk about some of the history that...
there will be spoilers, because we have to talk about the end. This film is... very old, and just look it up on Internet Archive. Honestly, you can find these all on Internet Archive, which, except for the newest American version. I don't know if you're supposed to be able to, but they're there right now, so go find them.
Yeah, they're all available. The fun fact about archive.org is it's a nonprofit, and it's hard. Once things are on there, it's sticky. So go check it out.
It's really hard to get stuff off.
It's worth exploring if you're interested in watching all 37 Godzilla movies. By the way, if for any reason any of you decide to watch all of the movies, contact me. I would love to talk to you about it. Maybe form a support group.
Alex will fly to where you are just to have coffee and talk for 3 hours about Godzilla.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
I just like made that up, but we'll see how it goes.
It's our new Patreon perk.
Yeah, you deserve it.
Alex
You
flies through your
deserve it.
city and hangs out with you. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the history that might go into the psychological fears of this movie. I feel like a lot of it is, or at least for us.
Well, first of all, we got to acknowledge that this is less than 10 years after the actual atomic bombs are dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
I mean, as Americans, and of course, anyone who is Japanese knows the history of this. But maybe if you're not, maybe you don't know, but at the end of World War II, 2 nuclear bombs were dropped by the Americans on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, forcing the Japanese to surrender and, in the American view, avoiding an invasion of the island, which would have been which would have cost a lot of lives. Also, the bombs cost a lot of lives. There's a lot of debate over whether or not it was worth it, and that works its way into this movie. But there was also a lot of lingering after effects of that nuclear radiation, which also works its way into this movie. And one other small little tidbit that most people don't know about, the Lucky Dragon 5 incident, which was a Japanese fishing vessel that fell victim to radiation from the American atomic bombing of the Bikini Island, which was just a nuclear test. It wasn't an attack, but a fishing boat being affected by a nuclear incident is also what kicks off this movie. So it's all very, very connected, and it's all very, very wrapped up in this new existential crisis at the beginning of the Cold War, where, suddenly like this huge destructive force can just be unleashed on you at any point, and there's hardly anything you can do to stop it.
Except make the same destructive force yourself, which creates the arms race.
Yeah. And
which is also part of the tensions in this film.
Yeah, in fact, we have a scientist who's the main character in this movie who develops a weapon that is quite possibly strong enough to defeat Godzilla, but is also so destructive and so terrifying that he's worried about using it. Like, how will he change the world by using it?
And that's kind of one of the big themes of the film, which is what makes this film incredibly culturally important, because you have this creature which was created by a weapon of mass destruction, and then you have to create an even more potent weapon of mass destruction in order to destroy it. And obviously, at this time period, Japan is very hesitant to do that. It basically puts them in the same position that America was in, trying to decide what is the best way to stop this seemingly unstoppable force, and what are the repercussions that are going to come from that. And I think that those are the best Godzilla films, is whenever it comes back to that really essential question of, what is going to solve this problem with the least collateral damage. And this film, that is at the heart of the film. And they try a lot of stuff before they end up going with this really, really powerful weapon.
I love that when they're trying these things, that becomes like the disaster movie, quote unquote, fun that we have in the film. The really entertaining bits of the film, when Godzilla's smashing through the tanks, when he's using his radioactive breath to melt the electric fence that they put up to stop him, when he's smashing through buildings. That's the really entertaining part that you come to the movies to see. But all of it gets tied together.
And 14-year-olds skip through the movie to see.
Yeah. And that's what... but also, all of the non-Godzilla scenes in the film, which are related to Godzilla, all do a very good job of tying in all of these techniques that are used, all of the stakes, so that when you see Godzilla smash through things, you're not just seeing him smash things and you're like, oh, that's cool. You see him smashing all of the sense of safety and balance and security that these people used to have in their lives. You see them smashing through their sense of moral correctness. Like, you have a moral compass, and then suddenly the stakes become so dire and so drastic that it gets completely tossed out the window. And do you
or
try
at least
to
push
stick
to the breaking point? Yeah.
Do you try to stick to it? Do you go take the nuclear option? it's all very, very well tied together, so that you can watch it one of two ways. You can sit back and turn your mind off and watch him smash some buildings, or if you engage actively in the movie, you're getting this really dire, like, hopeless situation, and how do you act in this situation? And we have this beautiful, like, balance of characters. I think they balance the non-Godzilla characters very well in this movie, between the scientist who is creating the super destructive weapon, the scientist played by Takashi Shimura, who is one of my all-time favorite movie actors,
Akira Kurosawa
regular. I just love that he pops up in this, because of course he does. He's a Toho studio actor. He has to.
Right.
But
still, I kind of felt like he was Alec Guinness in Star Wars.
Kind of.
Just way overqualified.
He's so good. I mean, this is the guy who did Akira, for God's sake. And here he is in Godzilla, which is not what you would think, but he does such a good job. I mean, his character just wants to study the creature. There's, of course, his daughter and the salvage boat captain, which I love that they made him a salvage boat captain. And he spends the entire movie trying to salvage the situation. Who are in love and trying to make it work, but also, like, they don't dive too far into any one of these characters to make it cheesy and pull away from Godzilla too far, which is great.
Which cannot be said about all the Godzilla films, but here there's actually a very balanced and nuanced set of characters.
Yeah, there becomes a very distinct divide over the course of these 37 movies. Where there are Godzilla scenes and there are non-Godzilla scenes. And some of them get mixed very well and blended very well together, and they tie in and they're spread throughout the film correctly or balanced well or what have you. And some of them, like especially the late Showa films, that are like the first half is not Godzilla. The second half is just Monster Brawl. And it's completely
and specifically
insane.
The last 15 minutes is Godzilla versus other titular character.
Yeah. And this film has a distinct advantage that none of the other films have. And do you know what that is, Jonathan?
Nobody knew what Godzilla was before going into
Nobody knows what Godzilla looks like before this movie starts. And they take I mean, it's not like they were thinking, oh, this is going to go for 37 movies. But they do a very good job of building all of the tension before you see Godzilla, like a decent chunk into the movie, like at least 30 minutes, if not more, into the movie when you see Godzilla for the first time. But you're learning all these facts, and you're seeing the disasters, and you're seeing these characters get set up in these ways. And you get
all the really cool moments that have become tropey now, but were probably fairly new at the time, like the footprints and walking into the lagoon with the tail swish, which is awesome. They bring that footprint back in the Matthew Broderick one, and it's not as good as the Matthew Broderick one, just throwing it out there. But they do a good job of leading up to it, and like you said in the notes, Alex, using this Jaws mentality, which obviously I think Spielberg took a lot from this movie going into Jaws and Jurassic Park and stuff like that, because this is kind of the original monster film, and how we're going to build up this thing and make it believable once we hit you with it. And especially for this one, when you've got to build up to a guy walking around in a big lizard suit. You've got to make us believe it before you show us that guy.
And the way they show the suit, they either hide him in darkness, they're distracting,
or behind a mountain.
He's shrouded in smoke or flames. Or if you're seeing him full on screen, like something's happening, like you're seeing his spikes glow, or you're seeing him breathe his radioactive breath, or you're seeing missiles explode around his head. There's not a lot of shots of just him in the suit standing there, which is good. One, because the idea of that is just a boring shot. And two, if you see that, it's the best way to take away that suspension of disbelief that is a giant monster. Because yes, we all know that obviously that isn't real. But if you shoot it the right way, if you balance your shots the right way, you're going to create that effect and convince the audience that it is real. It's just like when I notice this anytime I watch something, and clearly I watch too many things. But you'll notice when you're watching something, when you start watching it, you're aware of the area around the screen in your field of vision, but about 5 minutes in, that disappears, and you're just seeing what's on the screen. Which is great. That's good.
Regardless of if that screen is your iPad or like an IMAX movie theater.
Yeah, right. And that's what they kind of do with Godzilla himself, which is great. That's what you want.
Yeah. I think that's really, it's like totally a conversation for another day, but I think that's totally true that you can kind of like focus in no matter what you're watching. I mean, even just like filming stuff like I do for my job, I will get sucked into a little, 4-inch monitor on my camera and just like totally get blindsided by someone who's right next to me. Anyway, but I guess talking about the suit, there's some fun things because this is pretty new. For a while we've had stop motion animation, at least since King Kong in the 30s with Ray Harryhausen and stuff like that. But a term that I think was actually coined for the Godzilla films is suitmation, which is the idea of using a person in a monster suit in order to do these films. And of course, Godzilla kicks off this whole genre, this kaiju genre, which in Japanese, kaiju means strange monster or something like that. And it clearly spun off this whole genre that I think King Kong probably even fits into that genre, even though it was created before this technically
King Kong
kind of was cemented.
The American kaiju.
Right.
Which is
and
cool.
Obviously in the third Godzilla film, those two come together, so they're literally in the same universe.
Yeah.
But
did you know the special effects supervisor Subaraya was actually like a huge Harryhausen fan? Like King Kong.
Well, if you're an effects supervisor, you have to be a Ray Harryhausen fan.
Yeah. I mean, his favorite movie was King Kong, like the 1930s version. He loved it. He wanted to do stop motion on this movie, but it was too expensive, so they went with the suit instead. Which I'm just flabbergasted that the stop motion was more expensive than the suit, because going with the suit still means you have to build all the miniature sets for the suit.
Yeah, you have to build cities, like little cities for a guy to walk through.
I guess it has to be less detailed that way. I don't know.
I guess it's also less time consuming than doing frame by frame any day.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, so I do want to talk about the ending because I was kind of blindsided by it in the fact that and here are the spoilers, but again, go find this film and watch it. They actually killed Godzilla. I was not expecting that. I did not realize that he actually legitimately died in the first film. And it's not even like ambiguous because he gets disintegrated and you see his skeleton and you're like, oh, Godzilla is dead.
He's dead. I think it's almost pretty important that Honda went with that, because I think he wanted the 1950s, the late 1940s and the early 1950s were not like a great time for Japan. Like it was a period of rebuilding. Yeah. Also, it was a period of American occupation, and I think he wanted to give like a glimmer of hope. And I think he thought that Godzilla surviving and hanging over the head of this nation like the sword of Damocles was way too frightening to have at the end of this movie.
Yeah.
And besides, he didn't need to leave it hanging there because there actually was like a Cold War going on where everybody might have blown each other up at any given moment. So
right.
Like Godzilla didn't need to still be there. He came, he reminded people of their existential terror, and then he died.
Yeah. And I kind of like that the O-bomb, the oxygen bomb that the mad scientist in this film creates, kind of, I feel like it now has this this lore that it's the only thing that is completely effective at killing Godzilla. Because almost every other film, and again, I didn't watch all of them, but he fights with someone and then goes back into the water and is that kind of silent terror that could appear at any moment. probably when another monster shows up somehow.
Yeah. There's a lot of them where they think they kill him, and then it turns out in the next one they didn't.
Or they literally resurrect him in order to fight whatever's coming up, as we're going to see in our next film.
And the O-bomb actually comes back.
Oh, does it? Okay. I was hoping it did.
There's a film in the Heisei period called Godzilla versus Destroya, and Destroya is the O-bomb's remnants that have like glommed onto like a trilobite or a horseshoe crab or something. And it becomes like the O-bomb morphs it to become like its own monster that is just dead set on destroying Godzilla. Like,
oh, that's fascinating.
That's its thing. It's also
like that,
not one of the best movies of that period, but you know,
it's a cool idea.
It's a good idea in terms of how concepts go. It's a good idea. Before we jump out of this one, Jonathan, and we will in just a second, I promise.
I kind of wanted to bring up one thing too. So.
Okay, well, you got two things to bring up then. I wanted to bring up like this idea of balance, and we're getting, this is a very well balanced movie. They balance well between Godzilla moments and non-Godzilla moments. They balance well between scaring the audience and giving them just enough hope. They balance well between showing just enough of the monster and showing not too much of the monster.
Yeah, drama and campiness.
Yeah. And this series is a good study in that idea of balance, because there are definitely moments in the series that swing way too far one way or way too far the other way. Oh, yeah. In terms of all of those things that I've just listed and much, much more. So like just in terms of like the study aspect that we always focus on here on the show, focusing in, like, this is a really good place to stop and study. And if you are crazy or brilliant enough to watch all 37 of these movies, you'll learn a lot about how far to go one way or the other on any given thing. Yeah.
So I kind of wanted just to bring up this idea that, and I think it's because I had only seen the Matthew Broderick film, and I think I saw Mothra a long time ago. But I thought that Godzilla was like a real lizard, like an iguana or something that was hit with radiation and then turned into this huge giant lizard. But in this original film, it's actually a dinosaur that was alive somewhere under, like in this subterranean cave somewhere. And the radiation over time led it to grow and need to eat more and more until it finally resurfaced due to atomic tests. And I thought that was really interesting because they didn't even spend that much time like explaining why there are still dinosaurs on the Earth.
No, they were just like, yeah, of course there's still dinosaurs. That happens a lot. So I guess they figured
that, the fact that now we have a radioactive dinosaur would just supersede the fact that they kind of should explain why there are dinosaurs still. And that, I think that kind of leads us into the next film a little bit, because this whole idea of dinosaurs just being around and everyone being totally cool with it shows up again in this next film we're going to talk about.
Yeah. It is. This next film's something. Well, the next film is Godzilla versus King Ghidorah in 1991. And Jason, if you can, tell us what the plot of that movie is.
Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah from 1994. Prepare yourselves for some time travel. In 1992, a science fiction writer named Terasawa is writing a book about Godzilla when he discovers that Japanese soldiers stationed on Lagos Island in World War II had an encounter with a dinosaur very similar to Godzilla. Meanwhile, a UFO lands on Mount Fuji, sparking a national crisis. The people inside, 2 Westerners and a Japanese woman named Emmy, claim to be from the future, year 2204, where Godzilla has completely destroyed Japan. Going off of information from a future copy of Terasawa's book, they plan to go back in time and eliminate Godzillasaurus on Lagos Island, thus stopping Godzilla from coming into existence. They request the presence of some of the modern humans, including Terasawa, and go back in time to 1944, completing their mission, which they do, but in the process, Emmy and the Futurians plant 3 small creatures called Dorats on the island. When they return to 1992, Japan is no longer harassed by Godzilla, instead is terrorized by King Ghidorah, the result of the 3 Dorats being exposed to the same nuclear radiation on Lagos that had once turned Godzillasaurus into Godzilla. Feeling guilt over the betrayal of her own country, Amy reveals the truth to Terasawa as the other Futurians assert their rule over Japan. With the help of a reprogrammed super android, sabotage the UFO's control over Ghidora. Through a lucky incident, Godzilla still exists in this timeline and can offer battle to a now rogue King Ghidorah. But will the king of the monsters be able to reclaim his title?
If you are still listening to us, welcome back.
Yeah, welcome back to the show. This is Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, 1991.
You're listening to The Filmlings, now discussing Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah.
Later on NPR, economics and stuff. I don't know what's on NPR. I don't listen to it. Anyway, oh God, we're never going to get that NPR sponsorship now.
No. All right, that's enough stalling about this film.
Okay, so as you know, Jonathan, because you watched every second of this movie with eyes glued to the screen, eagerly watching every scene and loving every minute of it, there are definitely scenes in this movie in which Godzilla, or Godzillasaurus, because it's 1945 and Godzilla hasn't become Godzilla yet, he's still a dinosaur on an island in the Pacific that is currently occupied by Japanese World War II forces that are being attacked by American World War II forces. Yeah. And a bunch of American soldiers. Oh,
gosh. We have American actors in this film.
They're not good.
Oh, gosh. No, every film in this series that has American actors in it is like the American actors are terrible.
Oh, yeah.
Especially the Japanese productions. I mean, we have Bryan Cranston in our last film today. But, oh, my gosh. Like, I don't know if they were... Like, I almost doubt if they were native English speakers. Like, that's how bad the acting was.
Yeah. It's like they couldn't make it as actors. I also realize some of these people might still be alive. But it definitely felt like they couldn't make it as actors in America. So they were like, we'll go to Japan, where they kind of need some English speakers. And also, directing outside of your native tongue in a tongue that you're not fluent in is very hard. And I felt like that was definitely the case. Like, the commander of the American boat was not very commanding. He was very light.
It kind of makes you wonder, though. I mean, when we're watching these foreign films, the way that we try to do as much as possible, watching them with the subtitles rather than American dubs, is that you realize like what a small percentage of acting you can actually judge without having a native ear to the language. Because, you know, you can get their emotions and everything, but you can't get the inflection and all of that. That is a really huge part of acting. Because I feel like if you were watching the Americans and you only knew Japanese and you were just reading the subtitles, sure, I could probably buy that. But just listening to them was the most painstaking part of watching the Americans in this film.
Yeah, it did. It just felt off, which probably has a lot to do with what we assume those roles need to be, but also like they were just not well acted. Anyway, so there's scenes in which the American Army and Navy, Marines, it's not very clear. Anyway, they get trounced by Godzillasaurus. And when this movie was released in America, that especially because it was in relation to World War II, the last time these current allies were enemies, it sparked a little bit of a news controversy in America. I don't really think it's that big of a deal. I think it's mostly just like looking for a headline like, oh, hey, this thing might be a little controversial. Yeah. Let's make it a headline. But also, you know, I mean, I could see how people who were maybe involved in that war directly and went to see this movie took offense at that. But also, this movie is so ridiculous. I don't know. Like, there's
that pales with the rest of the film.
Yeah, there is no serious thematic anything in this movie. So,
oh gosh,
this movie is just crazy sci-fi plot jammed together with.
It is all Godzilla. The crazy sci-fi plots.
Yeah, no, there's time.
All of them.
There's time travel.
There's androids.
Yeah.
There is monsters, there is resurrection, there's cyborg monsters. It's literally everything you can think of is in this film.
Yeah.
So, oh gosh, I don't even know where to start with this film. I kind of just want to jump to the the climax of the film where they have to resurrect King Ghidorah after the Godzilla that they resurrected to kill King Ghidorah is now going to destroy Japan because Godzilla was going to destroy Japan, so they had to resurrect Godzilla. They had to get rid of Godzilla. They created King Ghidorah, and so they had to resurrect Godzilla to destroy King Ghidorah, and then they had to resurrect King Ghidorah to destroy Godzilla. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you got it right. So the key word for what Jonathan just went through is convoluted, which is to say that the plot of this movie is very all over. And
that's
the
only
place.
The monster part.
Yeah, it's
that's not even the time travel part.
Yeah, it's very all over the place. It's not very specific. This is definitely what the Godzilla series becomes after, especially a little bit during the Showa period towards the start. But then once Ishiro Honda starts to just not be involved in it at all, like it just goes off the rails into like this campy sci-fi stuff, which is fun. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
The plot is totally nonsensical. I do find it interesting. This is one of those movies that follows the structure I talked about earlier, where the first half is like not Godzilla stuff at all, and then the second half is like all Godzilla stuff. And that definitely happens in this movie. Like the first half is just a bunch of politicking. There's time travel involved. And the scene where they go back, or sequence, I should say, where they go back in time to the island to remove Godzilla, but also plant the little tiny alien things that become King Ghidorah.
Oh gosh,
is absolutely
they looked
ridiculous.
super cute. They looked like, I mean, this film reminded me a lot of, I think that the special effects in this film were kind of on the level of like classic Star Trek stuff. And so I was thinking that a lot. So that was kind of fun.
Actually, you know what, Jonathan? When I was watching this movie while I was waiting on a render at work, and one of my coworkers looked over my shoulder, and they knew that I was watching through all of the Godzilla movies, and they thought I was a crazy person for doing it, which is fair. But they were like, oh, hey, the special effects look pretty good on that. That's from like the 1960s, right? And I was like, actually, it's from 1991. And she was like, oh,
yep.
That's not so good.
Okay, Alex. So help me with one part of the plot here. I won't try and dissect the whole thing, but what was their plan to prevent Godzilla from destroying Tokyo in the first place? It was to transport him to the exact same island at a different period in time?
Are you talking about after King Ghidorah wins the first?
No, I'm talking about when they go back the first time. Godzilla has helped Japan defeat the Americans. He's bleeding out on the beach, and they're like, okay, in a couple months, America's going to drop some atomic bombs, and they're going to mutate this dinosaur, and it's going to become Godzilla.
So
we have to transport it somewhere else.
They move him to a different island at the same time. The island they move him to is in the Bering Strait. And so they're like, oh, okay, it's totally safe. No nuclear tests were done there. We'll move our and we'll leave our little King Ghidorah weird baby things here.
That was kind of like a subtle sneaky thing. They were like pretending to help Japan by getting rid of Godzilla, but then they left these things here because they knew that these three little cute things would turn into one single King Ghidorah with three heads.
Yes, obviously, clearly. Who doesn't know that?
Okay, so the other question is, why did they even like help them with Godzilla if they still wanted to like take Tokyo ransom?
Because Godzilla doesn't destroy Japan in their original timeline. Godzilla is a nuisance. And regularly ravages cities. Oh, yeah. But he doesn't destroy Japan. In the future that they come from at the beginning of the movie, Japan becomes an economic superpower. Which also, it should be pointed out, in the early 90s is exactly what Japan thought. And Japan was on track to become a mega superpower in the in terms of at least economic wealth in this current century that we live in. But then there was like a period of economic crashes, and for like a decade and a half, it spent time recovering. So actually, what they're trying to prevent happening in the movie actually gets prevented in real life due to a series of economic failures.
Interesting.
Which is interesting, yes.
So those really weird looking white guys from the future finally did it.
Yeah, they found the weirdest looking white guys. I also like that the guy
the
plays the android, who is a ripoff of James Cameron's T2 from...
Oh gosh, everything about this is straight out of American new wave blockbuster films. Everything about it. Yeah.
So the android, it should be mentioned, doesn't have anything about him that looks like he should be an android. He is
reference to Aliens.
He's just kind of like
it's like surprise, it's a robot.
Slightly balding, early middle-aged white dude. He can run super fast. He has super strength. Whenever he
oh gosh, the running where he's like floating.
Yeah, whenever he runs, it's like the slow-mo running that they used in like $6 Million Man, or the Bionic Man. I can never remember which. And there's a full series of sequences that are just like him running around doing crazy stuff.
Yeah,
for and against our protagonists.
Yeah, because all of a sudden, so he's chasing them. She's like, he's here to bring me back. And then she goes with him after they just ran away for like a really long time.
Yeah.
And then they get back to the bad guy's spaceship. And then I guess like on some downtime, they weren't that mad at her because they didn't like lock her up or anything. But on some downtime, they just she like, I don't know, took out his programming in his ear and switched some discs from red ones to green ones. So now he's a good guy. And then he started talking English for the entire rest of the film. And also the Japanese people started switching back and forth between English after that. I don't know. But he was strange.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I think they quoted Clint Eastwood. Someone quoted Clint Eastwood when they like blew up a bomb. What? Oh shoot, I forgot what line it was. I think it was a Dirty Harry line.
Oh, I don't even remember, man. I don't even remember. I think it's interesting. I think this movie is a good one to look at, and I think this part of the Godzilla series, we could have kind of thrown a dart and hit a movie that could have told us the same things, but we just so happened to pick one with a really, really, really crazy plot, which is fun at least. So I think there's a few points that we should take a look at here. One is that this is not the first movie to include a bunch of random white Americans in it in the Godzilla series.
Oh, I believe it.
That goes back all the way to
antagonistic white Americans, I expect.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. The one with Planet X, the first one with Planet X, it features a heroic duo of astronauts, one who is a Japanese man and one who is an American man named Glenn, which you'll notice most of the American men in this movie, in these movies, are named Glenn or some variation of Glenn. I don't know why that is such an American name to the people who make Godzilla movies, but it is. So
that's hilarious.
So that's something that's interesting. Obviously King Kong is like in the third movie, and King Kong is, like we said, the American kaiju. And you know, just considering the events that went into the existential fear that created the first Godzilla movie, and considering the long-term American occupation of Japan, the Godzilla series has kind of become like a way to not only explore Japan and its own existential fears, but also its ties and connections to America, like these two countries that have become so closely linked over the past half century or so, like inexorably, like they're just connected. And you see that in all of these movies, which is fascinating. We also see that these movies go way the frick off the rails. Like, they really do.
Yeah.
They get crazier and crazier trying to one up each other. I don't think you even saw the one, Jonathan, where there are a bunch of aliens that were secretly cockroaches the entire time.
No,
there's one with like a monster amusement park. There's one that's literally just they shot some scenes of a kid being bullied and trying to overcome his bullies, and he like daydreams about Godzilla, and all of his daydreams are just like clips from old Godzilla movies, and they just recut it back together. There's all sorts of nonsense in this series, and that becomes it in a big part. So a lot of it kind of goes off the rails. Like I mentioned with Godzilla 1954, this one is not a balanced movie. This one goes way too far in all sorts of directions. It's both like too plot heavy and not thematic enough, but also like
it's like
super
trying to be. Yeah, it's like trying to be a really serious, like I said, American New Wave blockbuster film, but it has none of the themes or depth or quality that any of those James Cameron and Steven Spielberg films had.
And I think at this point in the series, the people making them knew that these were going to be ridiculous movies, but that they were still going to make money off of making them ridiculous movies. Yeah. So it kind of becomes like this cyclical formula that just gets a little crazier every time they do it. But I had
this sense of Marvel being this generation's Godzilla for some reason, because it's somewhat formulaic, and you can just kind of put the Marvel label on it, and then we know like this set of characters. You can add to it, you can rearrange them, you can redo it, but people will keep going to see it no matter what.
A little bit. Actually, one of our trivia questions for this week, and this, I don't know if this is before or after, but if you're listening to the podcast right now and it comes out after the podcast, then you know the answer to this. There is a series of comics in which Godzilla fights the Avengers.
Oh my gosh, are you serious?
Yeah, Godzilla versus Avengers. I tried to see if I could secure a copy or like a digital copy. I could not find a digital copy, and all of the physical copies are really expensive. So
yeah, I bet.
So yeah, but that was definitely a thing. I think the most interesting thing about this movie, and the reason it actually made the list, is because we were reviewing all of these top Godzilla movie lists. We were looking at what makes each of them significant, and I read that this one was the first one in which Godzilla was a quote good guy. I don't know if that actually holds up, and there are definitely earlier movies in the Showa period in which Godzilla is a good guy, much more so than in this film. But this is the
he
first
seemed
film,
more like a tool almost.
Very much so. But in this movie, this is the first one where Godzilla does good for Japan.
Right.
And in specifically the way the plot is built in this one, Godzilla almost becomes a symbol of Japan's strength in both ways.
Yeah.
And because of the
he
convoluted
is a silent protector.
plot, like it almost becomes this thing where Japan has to like learn to harness and balance its own strength, in which like you have to be able to use it, but also if you let it go out of control, you'll end up destroying yourself. Which is interesting, and I'm not familiar enough with Japan in 1991 to tell you how significant that is. But it is definitely something that happens over the course of these films. In 1954, Godzilla was definitely Japan's antagonist and a symbol of its fears. But Godzilla, through his corny, stupid, convoluted plot films of the late Showa period and into the Heisei period, kind of becomes a anti-hero in a way that he gets absorbed into Japan's culture, into a way where he is kind of a symbol of Japan's strength, something to both be feared and be proud of. And it is kind of one of the most recognizable Japanese characters ever. Like, I feel like Godzilla is probably one of those characters with name recognition that goes global, like all over the world. Like you'd be like, hey, absolutely. What do you know about Godzilla? Yeah, I know about Godzilla. Who doesn't?
Yeah, and it's interesting that I think even from the first film, but definitely through these later ones, they never explain the name Godzilla. People just start calling him Godzilla.
That's my favorite thing in these movies. Even
they
in this
explain
film,
it in like some of the really later ones, like they explain it in Shin Godzilla, but especially here, like they don't have to explain it. In the first one, maybe you could argue that they should have, but
No,
as
they
it gets
explained it in
to
the
the
first
later
one.
ones, like, oh, did they?
yeah.
Okay.
Do you remember
I
the whole
missed that.
sequence? The people of the island where Godzilla attacked knew of Godzilla as a sea monster. It was something that they used to sacrifice young girls to. And there's, in fact, a whole scene where they have like a ritual dance to appease Godzilla. And clearly it doesn't work because they get attacked like the next day. So,
Right. Also, lots of parallels between that and King Kong, except that was kind of the entire focus of King Kong.
Yes, very true.
And okay, so because we brought it up so much, I just love that King Kong versus Godzilla is literally like the plot of King Kong is happening at the same time as the plot of the original Godzilla is happening, and they just like happen to converge in like this weird media circus type of way.
More or less,
but
yeah.
They literally go through all the beats of like finding this random island where people have said that there's this big monster, and then they find King Kong. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about today. I kind of want to just bring up my favorite part about my favorite scene from Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, which is when the one guy who has built this super company that has refinanced all of Tokyo, all of Japan's like financial. He's given Japan like its entire financial stability through his huge corporation. But he's also the general that was on the island where Godzilla saved them from the Allies. And he decides to stay in his big skyscraper as Godzilla comes to destroy Tokyo. And he has this really emotional moment where he stares into Godzilla's eyes while Godzilla stares at him. And then just like after a couple seconds blasts him with his atomic breath. And it's kind of one of the most amazing emotional anticlimax moments.
Yeah, no, that was a really interesting moment. I was almost, it makes you think Godzilla's going to spare him. And then you realize that, no, Godzilla's out of control.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think I might be able to get more meaning out of that if the rest of the movie had been slightly better balanced to that point.
Yeah, nuanced at all.
It wasn't. So it is what it is. It's not, and again, I don't think this is a bad movie because I don't think it was trying to be anything more than it was.
Right.
Which is a fun sci-fi B-movie romp with monsters. And it hits all those marks. But it is ridiculous.
And more.
It is ridiculous. Yeah. And I think that to understand the Godzilla series as a whole and Godzilla's place in pop culture and its place in the in Japan's like self-identity, you have to look at not only these gems of the Godzilla franchise, but also the ones that are like really campy and make up the bulk of it.
Yeah, because that is what Godzilla is for now anyway. People are trying to change that, but there's so much of the series that is this that you can't just like glide over it, especially when you're taking it as a whole.
All right, let's move on to Godzilla 2014. Jason, set up this American production of Godzilla for us.
Godzilla from 2014. Through an opening montage, it is revealed that the U.S. attempted to kill a modestly sized Godzilla with a nuclear bomb in 1954. In 1999 in the Philippines, the skeleton of another Godzilla is found in a uranium mine with 2 large spores inside of it, one already hatched, the other taken for study. The same year in Japan, a nuclear power plant is destroyed by what is thought to be a series of intense earthquakes. Supervisor Joe Brody loses his wife Sandra in the accident. 15 years later, Joe and Sandra's son has become a Navy explosive ordnance disposal office with a young family of his own in San Francisco. He's called back to Japan when his father is arrested for trespassing on the old nuclear power plant grounds. There, Joe talks to Ford into breaking in with him again, where they discover the site is no longer radioactive and that there is a government team here already investigating the large pod that has grown in the center of a ruined plant. The Brodies are captured by this government group, but then the pod cracks open. A giant beast emerges and attacks everyone. In the aftermath, Joe dies from his injuries, and Ford finds himself increasingly involved with the fight. A second MUTO, as the large beasts have been named, has hatched in Arizona and attacked Las Vegas, where its pod was being studied by the government. And now there's a large creature involved as Godzilla makes his debut in Honolulu, taking on the first MUTO while Ford and the other people present just try to survive. Ford joins one of the military units following the monsters to the west coast as they all converge on the city of San Francisco, where Ford's family is. Godzilla looks like he's here to help the humans in this reboot, but will he become a hero or stay a monster?
All right, so this Godzilla is one that if you're following Godzilla, you're gonna have to get used to for a little bit because they're building up a franchise around this guy. We've got at least 2 films in the works already, and I suspect that if they make money, we may be looking out for another run of Godzilla hitting all of his favorite monster nemesis. We've already got King Kong in the works, and from the trailers of the Godzilla film coming out later this year, we've got King Ghidorah coming back. So I don't know who else is coming back, but
Mothra and Rodan
officially
in the King of Monsters, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's credited.
Right, so
that's credited. That they've said those are his monster co-stars for that film. Yeah, and so
cool.
Okay, so let's.
So we're setting up a run of films here.
Yeah, we're doing it. We're doing all the work. Surprise! We're ending the podcast. We've got to go make Godzilla movies. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. So if I don't start off by saying this, I'm going to be frustrated for this entire conversation, Jonathan. So I want to get this off my chest. I think Godzilla 2014 is a really good movie. I think it is not a very good Godzilla movie. I think if you changed, I think if you changed the name, it would have been much better. To something else, something like Circling Godzilla, but not directly about Godzilla. And
okay, let's build that out because I had a lot of mixed feelings about this film too. So what do you think worked about it, and what do you think made it fall short in the Godzilla sphere?
So I think actually as a movie, I think it's really well constructed. I think the way they build the plot and the sequences is actually pretty ingenious. Your main character, Ford, and Godzilla are actually on parallel journeys for the entire movie. And they end up being hero buddies at the end of the movie because they end up taking this journey together over the course of the full film, fighting these mutos, which are the giant, kind of bug-like, kind of lizard-like, large radiation-feeding monsters of the movie.
Yeah, and if Godzilla as a dinosaur is never really explained, the mutos are very unexplained.
Yeah, no, so they kind of explain Godzilla in this one. They're like, Godzilla just exists as a big alpha predator of some kind.
Yeah, but he at least was a dinosaur that has become radiated. We've got that. The mutos come out of nowhere.
Yeah, no, we don't know. They come from. I think they're going to explain that in the next one. Just judging by the trailer, they're going to. It seems to suggest that the world used to just be all these big creatures, not even dinosaurs, but just big creatures.
Okay,
which is interesting.
Because Godzilla as a actual historical fact of a dinosaur is kind of canon from film 1.
It is.
But yeah, once you start getting into all these other ones, I know in the first Ghidorah film from the Showa period, Ghidorah is like a space monster that has just come off of completely destroying Venus before he makes his way to Earth, and Godzilla has to, with the help of Rodan and Mothra, fight him off in an incredibly ridiculous climax.
Yes, it is an incredibly ridiculous climax. Actually, I kind of enjoyed that movie just for the sake of seeing all the monsters team up against Ghidorah.
I liked the fact of watching Mothra get Godzilla and Rodan to get over their 12-year-old bickering.
That scene. I think I even tweeted about it because I loved it so much. But it was Mothra is like the mom of the friend group who is just trying to get the other two to behave long enough so they can save the planet. I absolutely love it. Yeah. But okay, so it's pretty well known, Jonathan. In fact, like it became a thing on YouTube. That like became, if you Google this movie, this is probably what you're going to find. That Godzilla was only in this movie for like 8 or 14 minutes.
Oh, really?
Of screen time, like just not that long of a time. And at first I was like, okay, well that seems pretty clever. I mean, the original movie did something pretty similar, right? They went with the Jaws theory of monster viewing, which it goes, don't show them too much, show them just enough to pique interest and keep people watching and keep it suspenseful and scary, but also don't show them too much to ruin it or oversaturate it or overdo it. And we have this whole string of movies like, the last one we just talked about, which swings so far on the balance scale towards monster battle that like that becomes the whole movie and the rest of the plot is just thrown out. But in this movie, we actually, I feel, in terms of like a Godzilla movie, swing too far the other way. The plot is really good. The themes are really well built out. The characters are really good, even though Ford is a little flat. But
I do want to talk about that. We do
get the full reveal of Godzilla in the Honolulu fight. Like, we get the full reveal of Godzilla. We're like, oh, okay, we're doing this now. This is great. And then, no, we get cut out of it and we go on to something else, which is just... So the way they did that cutout was just, excuse my English, but blue balling the audience. Like, hey guys, here's this monster battle. Nope, psych. Like, it didn't even feel like it was building suspense to like a really big monster battle at the end. It felt like we were going to get that a few times, and then we just never got it. Which is just really frustrating over the course of the movie for a movie named Godzilla.
It almost even did that with the reveal of the Mutos when he goes to the lab and they have this huge monster caged up there, and you're like, oh my gosh, they've got Godzilla. And then it's one of these Mutos, and you're like, wait, what the heck is that thing? And you don't even get to see Godzilla for another like 10 minutes.
Yeah. And I'm okay. I am okay if you want to delay the full reveal of Godzilla, if you want to keep Godzilla enshrouded in mystery and like there's something fighting this Muto, but like, what is it? We don't know. We just see these hints of battles as we struggle against this Muto, and then finally at the end we reveal Godzilla and we're ready for this big fight, and suddenly like there is the big fight and you're excited for it, but to actually ramp up all the way to here's the big fight now, psych, and then they do it again like a second time, here's the big fight, psych, and then finally there is the big fight at the end, and by the time you're there you don't feel ready for the big fight, you just feel tired, and you're like, please just give us the fight. I just want to see Godzilla beat this thing up. I just want to see that. And then you finally get there and you're like, this is really cool, but also like I'm really tired from the rest of the movie. And from like the perspective of a human plot, the plot's really good. To see like this movie that's essentially working to build Godzilla as a hero, and they do that by the end of the movie. Godzilla is a hero by the end of the movie, and they do it
a little too much in my opinion.
Almost a little too much, right? Like
I was kind of I don't know. This film, I guess for me, was almost there on like every level. I felt like even the family theme was a little bit too surface and not like deep enough. And I don't know if I was just kind of like worn out from all these films. So I was just like, come on, can we just like get one that goes all the way? And I was also frustrated because they run through all of the same like Godzilla defeat plans with like, all right, let's electrocute it or let's nuke it. And like, please stop suggesting to nuke Godzilla. Please stop.
We all know it's a bad idea now.
Yeah. And especially when you get to the point where they literally acknowledge that Godzilla eats nuclear radiation. Why would you still plan to nuke him?
Yeah, both him and the Mutos nuke him.
Yeah, I don't understand why that comes up every time. I actually really like the way they did it in Shin Godzilla, but we'll get to that in a second. But I thought even the family stuff, like I loved the moment where Bryan Cranston has to shut the door on his wife because the radiation is coming and it's going to infect the whole city.
That was a really good moment. That was maybe the best moment of the whole film.
I agree. And but I think it wasn't enough to make me believe that he would turn into this like crazy conspiracy theorist. I just don't think that was set up enough. And then it was weird when they got to the island and, well, after his son like busts him out of jail because he was trespassing in the Forbidden Zone.
Man, it sounds like a YA novel.
Yeah, or a freaking stalker, but nowhere near stalker. But then they get arrested again when they trespass on the Forbidden Zone, but instead of going to jail, they just like bring them directly to the epicenter of what they're doing. I did not understand that. And then there were like little hints of this family thing going on where he's separated from his wife and son, which was nice because they had a really good relationship. So you really want him to get back together with them. And then he has these little moments where like he has to help this little boy get back to his parents and stuff like that. That didn't really have a huge impact on the plot, except it kind of reminded you that, oh, yeah, this guy is separated from his wife and kid. So I don't know. I just felt like there was like this separation from family theme going on. And then also he's trying to, work with his team and be like the one that we're focusing on for defeating Godzilla. But it just didn't go that next level for me, which may be like a really nitpicky thing considering all the films that came before this. But I think because of how bad all the ones that came before this was, I didn't want okay, this is good enough Godzilla, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get that. And I do like that the take on this movie is that everything before it went too far to the monster. So what if we go way more human and let's try that?
Yeah.
And they do that, but I think you're right. And I think we're both right. I think we're hitting different points, but I think we're both right. I think you're saying they didn't go far enough human if they wanted to go that route. In which case you just have this movie where you're so engrossed in the story of Ford and his family and everything that's happening to them that, the fact that it's happening against this backdrop of giant monsters is interesting, but you can wait for the monster fight because you're so eager to see what happens to Ford and his family next. And then on the other hand,
hits this kind of vanilla middle ground.
Yeah, since they haven't hit that mark with the family, then they at the same time
they don't deliver enough with the monsters.
So it hits like this awkward middle ground. I do like the overall take on it. I think maybe it just needs to be refined a bit more. So maybe in the next movie,
and the
work.
filmmaking was amazing all the way through. So we can't even like pick on that.
Oh yeah, no, it was a beautiful movie. I think it was absolutely gorgeous, very well shot. They kind of go back to the roots of like that 1954 film where everything is shrouded, everything is hinted at. Selecting stills for this film for our Instagram was very fun because they were all good. So it was like, okay, cool. This is a good problem to have. Like there's too many good ones. What do I pick? So it was a very fun movie. It was well executed technically. You're totally right.
Right.
But also,
and I've got
maybe maybe it's a new take on Godzilla, and maybe it just needs some more time to develop, and maybe they'll get it right in the next one. But also, looking off of the trailer so far, I don't know. Have you seen the trailer for the new one, Jonathan?
I have. It's been a little bit, so I don't remember it very specifically. But yeah, I remember it's a lot of kind of like atmosphere and building up, or maybe I just saw the first teaser.
The extreme wides of the monsters in the new one look incredible. Like, it looks like the next one's going to be really pretty. But also, just judging off of the voiceover they put on it, it looks like the plot might be really dumb. So,
it's falling solidly back into the Godzilla canon.
So we'll see how it goes. It'll be a fascinating one to see. It seems like so far the only one who's been able to really get the balance of these movies right is its originator, Ishiro Honda. And maybe that just is the case. Maybe no one else can do it quite like he can. After all,
I think Shin Godzilla got pretty close. I do want to talk about Shin Godzilla.
Oh, we'll talk about Shin Godzilla.
But I have to bring up the final shot of this film where Godzilla has just finished like rampaging through the city and destroying the Mutos. And for some reason, the Mutos are worse than Godzilla. I think it's because they were going to plant a bunch of babies and make a lot of them. But
the Mutos were kind of
Godzilla,
like sparking the problem, and then Godzilla was chasing them down. I think they were a little too vague on that, honestly. But it was very much like, oh my god, they've been studying the Mutos forever. They didn't know what these eggs were, and then suddenly the Mutos were like directly attacking cities and stuff. And then just by the fact that he showed up later and he's been following the Mutos just like the Army and Navy have. Godzilla is like kind of given leeway to keep chasing the Mutos because everybody's just desperate for something to stop it. And if it's Godzilla, then it's Godzilla.
Nobody is going to blame the scientists who definitely should have killed these things like years ago while they were still hadn't hatched yet.
Oh yeah, no, the scientists in this one are terribly reckless, terribly.
But that final shot where Godzilla roars like he knows he's the hero of this movie and then like wades into the water while everyone is like crying because they're so happy, like it's a friggin' Superman film and Superman just swooped in to save the day and is flying away, was just that almost crossed the line into like completely back the other way into campy territory.
I think
where Godzilla becomes their superhero, and I was like, I feel like he should still be a threat to you guys, but okay, that's cool.
Yeah, maybe if the
there's
humans
some
had
mutual understanding
with a more guarded watching and waiting to see what Godzilla's going to do when he wakes up, like not cheering him.
Yeah, there could have been like a nice dramatic line, you know, like the ending of Dark Knight, where it's like, he's helped us this time, but that may not be the case next time, or something, like anything except for like you are our savior.
I think you could have done it totally visually, where like the army is ready to attack Godzilla when Godzilla wakes up, but they're gonna wait and see what Godzilla does, and then Godzilla roars at them, and you're like, oh shit, and then Godzilla turns and walks into the ocean, and you're like, is he our hero? Question mark, and then leave it at that.
Yeah. It definitely crossed a line there. I was like, this. I mean, I get what you're doing, but the rest of the film did not lead me up to like totally be like, yeah, Godzilla.
And maybe they'll rehash that more in the next one. I don't know. We'll see. We will see.
Yeah.
But this one also has. I mean, this one also has a very big emphasis on the natural order. Like, I think the scientists kept talking about how Godzilla's here to reset the natural order. And just judging off of the trailer of the next one, there's also going to be a large natural balance theme to that one too. So I think that's the path we're headed down.
At least they didn't try to control Godzilla with bird noises like they did with one of the monsters in this series. I don't even remember which movie that was, but they were like, it reacts to these bird noises whenever they're around him.
There's a lot of them where they try to control Godzilla and other monsters in various ways, and some of the ways they do that are more ridiculous than others.
Oh, that was King Kong versus Godzilla. Everything comes back to King Kong versus Godzilla.
As it should. All right, so do you want to go to overall notes now, Jonathan?
Yeah, so let's talk about overall notes. We've already gotten into a lot of this, but Godzilla begins as this really thematic thing. I kind of think of it in the same way that you can think of Night of the Living Dead and the following kind of zombie craze as like America's fears of this, I guess, unification and dehumanification of people and this crowd mentality. But Godzilla is just this embodiment of raw, untamable, unpredictable power that people have to find a way to control, and they have to find a way to deal with it responsibly. And I think that is the most important part, is this idea of balancing all of the options, trying to come out with the safest solution possible for the largest amount of people possible. And those are the really interesting, I mean, just in general, those are the more interesting moral dilemmas than what monster can we use and which one is on our side and that kind of thing, which are fun. But if the way that this series starts, it starts as a series that thinks, like we talked about last time, which are obviously the ones that I gravitate more towards. And there are obviously different times and places for different kinds of films. But I think the fact that this starts as a really thoughtful series and kind of devolves from there is a very interesting addition to this list of film series that we've been talking about. Some that kind of fluctuate between, like Bond, which starts off with a lot of lightheartedness and goes through ups and downs of having like some really serious films and then some extremely campy films, and then coming back to a good balance and reflexiveness to Planet of the Apes, which is very thoughtful all the way through, tackling a lot of issues, except for Tim Burton's film. I have to always put that disclaimer in there. And then this one, which comes from a really high place on the intentionality and thematic scale, and then nosedives and tries to pick its head back up, and has limited success throughout its existence.
Yeah, I think something that we're starting to see, especially over the course of these series that have run for such a long time, it's interesting that
Bond, Planet of the Apes, and Godzilla all started like within 10 years of each other. So they're all like fairly contemporary throughout their runs.
Yeah. We all of our films all of our super series kind of start at that same time period, which is interesting. Also, if you go too far back, like the serials of old are just literally the same movie over and over.
Yeah. So, and too much newer than that, and it's not a super series.
Yeah, that's right. So this is the right spot for that type of thing.
Sweet spot. Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. We've seen all these very long running series, and I think we do have to stop and ask how a series can run for such a long time. And a key part of it is always going to be how it can remain economically viable, because nobody's going to put up the money for it. No studio is going to put up the money for it to be made should it cease to be economically viable. And some of them have managed to keep their form and do that, kind of like Bond. Although we see this kind of the same thing in Bond. Like, it starts off very Fleming-ish, and then it kind of gets campier and campier as time goes on, to a point where it has to kind of reset in the current era, and become a little more serious. And we see this.
But the general model of each of the films, I mean, is still very similar between the Craig ones and the Connery
and
ones.
I think that's because it starts off commercially viable enough and like campy enough to pull that off. Like, the beginning formula has enough, and we talked a lot in that episode about like wish fulfillment. I think the general model has enough of that it can kind of keep looking like that for most of its run and remain economically viable and not have to change too much. Whereas with Godzilla,
and I think Connery's run has enough of that balance that we've been talking about between camp and drama that the series can fluctuate on both sides of that seesaw, and still come out okay, because as a series it has both of those within it, and so whichever side that it falls to, it still feels true. And Planet of the Apes starts on the thematic and thoughtful side and pretty much carries that all the way through, except for one film, which is why it's the one that nobody talks about.
Yeah. And I think in Godzilla, we actually have a really interesting case. I think we kind of got lucky in a way, especially if you're like me and Jonathan and you really like Shin Godzilla, that the series decided to go campy. Because I don't think that the first two Ishiro Hondo films are very dark, very serious, and they're really good, but I don't think a series like that can remain economically viable or popular and not exhaust its audience if it runs for 10, 20 films. Like, the only way you get to a 10, 20, 30 film run is by going to this kind of like B-movie place that it goes to, where it's cheap for the studio to produce. It's just relying on its camp and its fun value to make its money back in theaters. And it does that. And occasionally along the way, it makes a gem or two. And in the more modern era, it's become valued enough because we've gotten to this point where people have grown up with the films and people like the films and people want to see the films remade to the quality that they were used to growing up with, which I think might be a lot of what happened with the remake, the most recent reboot of Planet of the Apes, to see it come back and be more serious in the current era. So in a way, it's almost like Godzilla went into this hibernation state of camp and just stayed alive for 30, 40 years. And now suddenly we're getting the Godzilla series of Universal is doing it, I think.
I'm not sure.
Then, I don't know either. And then the Shin Godzilla, hopefully, series that Toho is doing. And I really like Shin Godzilla, and I want to see more of that kind of thing. And I'm curious to see whether or not the new ones are going to be good in here in America. So I'm kind of glad that it went into that camp hibernation state. Plus, like, those movies are fun. Like, they are genuinely fun.
Yeah. It's just something you put on and you just got to accept it for what it is. But what it is a lot of really creative monster design, if nothing else. And a lot of people having fun making movies. I mean, all of these films involve, well, except for the very recent ones where we actually have computer generated monsters, but we have actual people like in these ridiculous suits hitting each other and kicking each other and flying on wires. And that must have been so much fun to create. I can't even imagine.
You know what always terrifies me, Jonathan?
What?
The monster suit scenes that happen underwater. Like being in thought of being inside a monster suit underwater. I don't know if they have tubes hooked up. I don't know if they just had safety crews standing by. But the idea of being within the rubber suit that somebody probably has to help you in and out of underwater is freaking terrifying to me.
And it's not like these are not like Gilman from Creature from the Black Lagoon, where that suit is designed for maximum mobility under the water. These are clunky, and I don't even know how those suits survived underwater, honestly.
I don't know. I'm sure they went through several
imagine you would
suits
just sink
film.
like a rock.
Yeah, no. It was...
But I think, like, in the original Godzilla, whenever Godzilla is sinking into the O-bomb, it's got to be just like a toy that they dropped. Because, I mean, he's not moving or anything. It's just a scale effect, I imagine.
Probably. There's
actually a really dramatic scene with all those bubbles going up and everything.
Oh, yeah. No, of course. The original one is really good.
Yeah, no, it's awesome.
The original one and the original one is much better than I think most people remember it to be, unless you've seen it recently.
Yeah.
Like,
it's in the Criterion
really
collection,
good.
for goodness sake.
It's really, really good. Okay, so let's talk about some of the honorable mention picks or future influence picks. Let's talk about two real quick, and then we'll talk about Shin Godzilla, which is Jonathan's, I think, all-time favorite at this point. He's very excited about that. King Kong versus Godzilla from 1962 is the third movie in the series. It's one that I really value, just because, for one, it's a weird mix of East and West. Like, there's just an American newscaster who's just speaking in English the whole time. And two, like, this weird formal 60s, 70s composition that feels very symmetrical and very meta on a level that rings very similar to Wes Anderson, because Wes Anderson drew a lot of his film technique from this era. So I spent that whole movie being like, is this a Wes Anderson monster movie? And just enjoying the crap out of that. Of course, and let's talk about one other movie before we get to Shin Godzilla, Jonathan, then I'll let you loose. Pacific Rim and Pacific Rim Uprising, one from 2013, one from a few years after that. I don't actually remember. Anyway, they're large kaiju-inspired films. They don't actually have any direct reference to Godzilla, mostly for licensing reasons, but were clearly inspired by Godzilla and his whole crew of monsters. They're fun movies. They're large. The first one has some really cool themes and really cool dramatic pinnings to it. The second one, kind of, maybe not so much. And a lot of the battles, while large and impressive, kind of get shrouded in a lot of rain and sparks and shaky close-ups and stuff, and I found that a little distracting. But it was a really fun 2-movie series. I highly recommend it. It also goes back to the Dinosaurs Were Monsters too bag for part of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's interesting. I recommend watching them because then you'll understand what I'm talking about here, Jonathan. But they're not movies that are wastes of time. They are good movies. Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, Shin Godzilla, Jonathan, go.
All right. Honestly, we pick these movies most of the time before we've seen them, but Shin Godzilla definitely deserves to be in this list from 2016. And I think what I was most surprised by is just the utter change of style. Like at some point I was like, okay, we're doing the same thing. We've got this kind of almost interesting human plot, usually involving a brother and a sister or a love story. And then something is kind of happening in the background, and then Godzilla shows up, and we either have to explain him or we have to remember where he was at the end of the last movie, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Shin Godzilla starts from scratch. It's like, we don't need to waste our time on main characters. We are just going to have this event happen. We've got press coverage. We've got meetings happening, and it's cut so fast. It makes you feel this event happening. And so you've got all of these, bureaucratic meetings and red tape, and they even talk about that. And then you've got focus groups, and you've got international relations, and you've got all of this stuff happening. And then you kind of get character development through that, and one guy slowly becomes the main character, but it wastes no time. It is kind of like a masterclass in plot conservation, and also it does not follow the Jaws rule whatsoever. For the first 10
host.
minutes, maybe. And then, yes, it does. It goes full host because this terrifying thing crawls up onto Japan's coast somewhere. I don't remember where. And just starts traipsing through the city, bleeding and just knocking stuff over, and then it changes before your very eyes, and it just becomes Godzilla throughout.
With a really long
origin
tail.
Story with a really long tail, yeah. And the origin story is new and refreshing. In the fact that it is some creature that has just been munching on radioactive waste that has been illegally dumped in the ocean, which is also a really interesting update of some other themes like just conservationism and stuff like that, which is a more modern issue than actually getting a nuke dropped on you. And then it goes through the solutions, which a whole huge chunk of the film is following this think tank that is trying to come up with solutions to Godzilla. And then also flip-flopping between this think tank and the bureaucrats who are actually having to make the decisions. And then Godzilla reaches his final form and is probably the most destructive Godzilla. But it's probably the most destructive Godzilla out of all the ones that I saw. I don't know about you, Alex.
He shoots an array of lasers out of his back. Yeah, it's freaking terrifying. He has multiple points of laser shooting, and it's hinted that he's about to essentially at the end of the movie, if he wasn't stopped, he would have broken down into a bunch of smaller humanoid Godzillas that would have become the new master race, which is just terrifying.
Yeah, and he just like he raises the city like RAZE, as it like he literally has a beam that will just cut down buildings and stuff. And I don't want to spoil this movie because it's new enough, and I think people should definitely seek it out and find it. But the way that they stop Godzilla is new, and the fact that America is trying to nuke Godzilla was very satisfying for me because I was very tired of people trying to nuke Godzilla. And so if it kind of becomes the conflict where it's like, America's going to nuke this thing if we don't do something about it, so we have to find a different solution before that.
Yeah. I love the creature design. I love that he evolves between different forms. That's really cool. And I love that each form, even the one that looks most like what we think of Godzilla, is like corrupted and weird and bumpy and jagged and
that thing where its
gross.
Jaw like splits.
Yeah, like whenever it breathes its radioactive breath, like its jaw splits open to become like a 3-way jaw and like breathes its laser. It's really... And it acts weird too. Like whenever it like overheats and has to run back into the ocean, or it just like freezes, it like shuts down for like a portion of time. It's an odd, off-putting, unsettling creature, probably in the same way that like 1954 audiences first reacted to the first Godzilla, which is, if that's what you were going for, good job. My biggest gripe with this movie, and honestly, it's not that much of a gripe, kind of along the lines of the American actors in the King Ghidorah that we talked about, is, and it's not that she's a bad actress, it's just that she's not an American. So the American, like, I don't know if she's a congresswoman or if she's like an assistant congresswoman, or something like that. But
the Japanese American character,
but yeah, she's Japanese American, and her father is a senator. And she's supposed to be an American, so she acts like super brash and like super cocky. And it's hilarious because whenever you see other countries' interpretations of how like your country acts, like it's just really funny, especially as an American, because they're all bad. But also like she speaks English a lot in the movie, which I don't know why she's speaking English to all of these Japanese people. And 2, she doesn't have an American accent, and she can't do an American accent. So it's a little off-putting as an American. I'm sure for Japanese audiences, it wasn't that off-putting because that part just would have been subtitled. But for me, it was like, oh, like I get it. I know what's going on. It's not that big of a deal, but it's inherently off-putting. Like I know that's supposed to be an American. That's
interesting.
But she doesn't sound like it.
I felt that off-put a little bit, but I kind of assumed that her character was English as a second language kind of deal.
No.
She's talking like she was raised in America, she was like, supposed this to is the land of my grandmother.
Yeah, she was supposed to have been born in America. Her father was. She was like a second or third generation American. And also, like, I want to throw this out there: having an American accent does not mean you sound American. Like clearly immigrants don't have American accents, but she's supposed to be like a third generation American, a native, and she does not sound like that, and that was very off-putting to me. That. Also, the fact that she was constantly like, I didn't want to see the land of my grandmother. She keeps talking about her grandmother, and I just find it very funny. Say
that her grandmother was at Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Yes, I don't remember which one.
It was a very important connect. Kind of makes sense. But I think they dropped the grandmother name like a few too many times.
Yeah.
Also, they did a very good job of never showing us any Caucasian American faces, which I think was
especially the president.
They don't show it, and even when she's talking to somebody, like I don't even know who, like a mentor on the plane. I don't think it's the president on the plane with her when she's talking to somebody, but somebody. You just see their hands, and it's making it very clear that this is, even in the way they find the solution, that this is a Japanese movie, this is a Japanese problem, and the Japanese people are going to be the ones who solve it, even if it is a daughter of the country who has moved off to another country through several generations. They're going to be the ones who solve it, not white Americans, which is I think it was a very bold move of the movie, and it was a strong move, and I think it worked.
Yeah, and it wasn't like, oh man, all Americans are the worst. It was just like their plan is not the best one, and I mean, it kind of makes sense. It's like it's something that they would do in order to kind of subdue this issue that could be a global one, but also it's just going to have catastrophic collateral damage for Japan.
Catastrophic,
and they go through. And they go through like literally pretty much every aspect of it. So they talk about how the Japanese prime minister talks to the American and Russian leaders. And it's like, how would you feel if we had to do this to New York or Moscow or whatever? And they're like, okay, yeah, we get it. And then they're like, okay, never mind. We're just going to nuke it anyway. So, I mean, even the political debates in this film are really interesting. And I think it's because the filmmaking in this moves. It goes so quickly, and it you know, you kind of are just chasing the plot to keep up with it, and then Godzilla shows up, and you're like, oh gosh, this is what we're here for. Yeah.
It's bold to put it all in the day. It moves quickly. You don't get bogged down in anything that isn't like this. Clearly, the national emergency has preoccupied everybody, and everybody's preoccupied by it. So, yeah.
Anyway, it was a very good movie.
Yeah.
If you are trying to get Alex to come have coffee with you and you end up watching through all these films and you just need a break, just watch Shin Godzilla and then continue your romp, and you'll just know that it gets better. There's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yep. Oh, man. Gosh, I don't even want to tell you how many movies I actually clocked in January, because like it's an absurd number.
It's
a lot. It's a lot of movies.
I feel for you.
It's more than the Godzilla movies. Anyway, what are we talking about next week, Jonathan? What are we talking about?
Next time, we're talking about a different animal, not a gorilla whale, but rather a panther. A pink panther, to be specific, and not actually a panther. We're talking about a diamond or something. So we're going to be talking about the Pink Panther series, which I have found in telling a couple people over the last couple weeks that there are 11 Pink Panther films. That is a fairly shocking number that people did not realize, because you might be familiar with the Steve Martin films and like maybe know that there was an old one that it was a remake of. So anyway, we're going to be talking through the series. We're going to start with the first one, The Pink Panther from 1963. Then we're going to move on to the second one, where the series takes a shift.
It's a pretty steep shift too. Like
we'll talk about that.
I don't know if you've watched them yet, Jonathan. It's a very steep shift.
Not yet. But 1964. And then we will be talking about the first of the Steve Martin films from 2006.
Yeah. Just to go on a side note real quick, Jonathan, this series is not a stable one. There is maybe like a few movies where it's like consistently, this is the type of storytelling, and we're going to have it from this movie to this movie to this movie. But it changes a lot. There's a lot of one-offs. There's a lot of craziness that happens in this series. So it's going to be an interesting one to talk about.
Yeah, I think it'll be a good addition to this set of film series, because we've seen ones that are incredibly repetitive, ones that fluctuate in tone, and ones that fluctuate slightly in structure or I guess timeline.
It'll also be nice to have
Pink
one
Panther
that feels,
will be a little different.
That feels a little smaller. Like the last three we've talked about, been very big, very in your face, and this one is a little smaller, a little cozier in the scope of its storytelling. So it'll be a nice change of pace, and it will also be the cap of the no pun intended, the jewel in the end cap of the Super series. Yes. So it'll be great. Make sure to come back next time on the show. Go watch your movies. And yeah. So donations, Jonathan, let's talk about our new patrons.
Yeah, so we do want to say thank you to Brandon Saber, who is our newest patron. And we definitely appreciate the support. Again, if you are interested in supporting the show, we do have a Patreon and a Ko-Fi coffee page. I think we're just going to say it like that every single time.
Yeah, because I'm still not sure how to say it. So
nobody knows.
I'm sure it's supposed to be
you can
coffee,
find the links,
but maybe not.
Yeah. You can find the links to them pretty much anywhere on our Twitter or on the blog. And yeah, we really appreciate it. Again, it helps us to keep doing this. It makes it make a little bit of sense for Alex to watch this many Godzilla movies if we have people supporting us and covering some of our overheads like our SoundCloud and stuff like that. So thank you to Brandon and the other people who have already subscribed. And we really appreciate anyone else who is considering subscribing in the future.
Of course. Thank you all, seriously, from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you so much for helping support the show. And please continue to do so. We will continue to make excellent content for you in return. But that's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Garinger.
And I am at the Blue Jay, 1994.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.com.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people will know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next time.
All right, see ya.
This is what I am now for the rest of my life, is the guy who can pull random Godzilla facts out of his butt. Like, just on call.
Who has watched every single Godzilla film.
I'm a film nerd.
Is that a badge on Letterboxd?
Yeah, why doesn't Letterboxd have badges? That would be pretty nice. Also, where's my Criterion membership card? I watched all the Godzillas. Give me one, please.
They might revoke your Criterion membership card, actually.